Most of what people think they know about the Middle Ages is way off. Movies love showing poor villagers living in fear of witch trials, but the truth is, medieval life was even stranger than fiction. We're talking about a period that stretched from the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 all the way to the start of the Renaissance in 1453. Over those centuries, some customs were not just unusual, they'd be criminal today. Some came from misguided medical theories, others from harsh justice systems, and a few were simply bizarre traditions passed off as normal. But together, they paint a picture of a time when the line between order and chaos was incredibly thin. Let's look at 10 medieval practices so strange they'll make you feel lucky to be living in the modern world. The real shock isn't that these things happened, it's that entire societies thought they were totally reasonable. Bleeding. People to treat illness. Imagine going to the doctor with a headache and being told the cure was to drain your blood. For hundreds of years, from the 800s to the 1500s, that was standard medical advice in Europe. Doctors across France, England, Italy, and beyond relied on bloodletting to treat almost everything from fevers to infections. This wasn't fringe medicine. It was taught at major universities like the one in Salerno, Italy's first medical school. The theory came from the ancient Greek Dr. Galen, who said the body was made up of 4 fluids or humors, and too much blood was a problem, and so doctors tried to fix illnesses by removing it. There were different ways to do this: cutting open a vein, using leeches, or even applying a heated cup to suck blood through the skin. Some people believed it worked, especially because it sometimes lowered blood pressure temporarily. But in the long run, it caused more harm than good. In 1685, doctors drained blood from King Charles II of England while he was having a stroke nearly 2 pints. He didn't survive. A century later, George Washington was treated the same way for a throat infection. His doctors removed about 40% of his blood in one day. He died from blood loss, not the illness. It wasn't until the 1800s that the medical world began abandoning this deadly treatment, but not before it had taken countless lives. The truth about witch hunts think the Middle Ages were full of witches being burned at the stake. Not quite. That image mostly comes from myths. Large-scale witch hunts didn't happen during the medieval period. They came later. During the 1500s and 1600s, in the early modern era, and the people behind most of those hunts weren't medieval Catholics, but educated Protestants. In fact, the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages usually discouraged witch trials. Back in 785, a church council even banned punishing women for flying with the devil, calling the idea ridiculous. During most of the medieval era, accusing someone of witchcraft could get you in trouble. The real hysteria started after the Middle Ages, in places like Germany, where Protestant regions went on witch-hunting sprees. Between 1550 and 1650, Germany executed up to 25,000 people for witchcraft, more than all other parts of Europe combined. Meanwhile, Catholic regions like Spain and Italy saw far fewer executions. The difference came down to beliefs. Protestant teachings focused more on individual relationships with God, and the devil making personal. Satanic pacts seemed more threatening. In contrast, Catholic doctrine was more focused on structured rituals and less alarmed by witchcraft. Some of the most brutal crackdowns happened in Bavaria, where even Catholic leaders influenced by Protestant ideas joined in. Bishop had over 900 people executed in just 5 years. Scotland also followed this path, executing around 4,000 people between the mid-1500s and early 1700s. Even King James VI of Scotland, later King James I of England, wrote a book about hunting witches. So where did the witch-burning stereotype come from? It's mostly from Protestant propaganda, meant to paint medieval Catholics as superstitious and cruel to spite. Protestants doing most of the actual burning. When the medieval era ended in 1453, large-scale witch hunts still hadn't begun. The real panic started later, when more modern thinkers decided old beliefs weren't scary enough. Torture is a legal tool in medieval courts. If you couldn't prove someone was guilty, there was another option: torture them and see what happens. This method, called trial by ordeal, was used across England, France, and parts of Europe, from the 800s to the 1200s. The thinking was this: if someone was innocent, God would protect them. If they were guilty, they'd suffer or die. It was seen as divine judgment. One common ordeal involved carrying a burning hot iron bar while barefoot. Afterward, priests would check the wounds a few days later. If they were healing well, the person was declared innocent. If not, they were punished, often with death. Another method involved cold water. Accused people were tied up and thrown into a river. If they floated, it meant they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent but might drown anyway. Then there was trial by combat, where the accused had to fight their accuser or a hired fighter. Winning proved your innocence, at least in theory in theft cases. Suspects had to plunge a hand into boiling water to grab a stone. The deeper the crime, the deeper they had to reach. Wrist deep for small thefts, elbow deep for major ones. Kneeling nicely meant you were cleared. Infected wounds meant guilt. These brutal tests scared many people into confessing, even if they were innocent. It was a kind of forced plea deal. Admit guilt to avoid something worse. Eventually, in 1215, the Pope banned priests from being involved in ordeals. Without church support, the practice faded, and courts started using juries and more fact-based investigations. But for centuries, the justice system relied on pain and fear to determine guilt. Animals on trial, believe it or not, medieval courts didn't just try people, they also put animals on trial.
Oh.
Between the 1200s and 1600s, animals were taken to court for crimes like theft, murder, and disturbing the peace. These weren't rare events. France alone recorded over 200 cases, and similar trials happened in Italy, Switzerland, and parts of Germany. One of the most famous cases happened in France in 1386, when a pig killed a child. The pig was arrested, put on trial, given a lawyer, and sentenced to death by hanging. For the execution, it was dressed in human clothes, including a jacket, pants, and gloves. Other animals faced legal charges too. In 1519, a French court went after field mice for ruining crops. Since the mice obviously didn't show up, a lawyer represented them and argued that they were just trying to survive. In Switzerland, beetle larvae were summoned to court in 1478 when they didn't appear. The court banished them from the area. Some trials went on for years. In 1587, a French village spent a long time prosecuting weevils for crop damage, even giving them to defense lawyers. The legal idea was that all of God's creatures had free will and could be judged for their actions. Domestic animals like pigs and cows faced harsher penalties because they lived among humans and were expected to follow the rules. Eventually, as legal systems advanced and views on animals changed, these trials stopped. But for hundreds of years, animals were treated like people in court, complete with trials, lawyers, and even public punishments. Dangerous baby care. Medieval parents loved their children, but their child care methods were often deadly. Up to half of children died before age 5, many due to well-meaning but harmful practices. Wealthy families used wet nurses, chosen not just for health but for personality and appearance. Blonde hair was considered a sign of better milk. Poorer families used homemade substitutes like wine, honey, and bread, believing these would strengthen babies. Fortunately, these often did more harm than good. Swaddling was another problem. Babies were wrapped tightly for months to keep limbs straight, leading to circulation and breathing issues. Bathing was rare. Parents believed water was bad for babies' skin. Instead, they used salt or wine to clean them, and diapers were changed. Infrequently, for teething, babies got coral necklaces or had fat rubbed on their gums. Colicky infants were sometimes given opium-based syrups, which led to fatal overdoses. Many parents waited to name children until they survived the first year. Infant death was so common, it was seen as God's will. Religious customs added risks. Sick babies were pressed to relics or taken on pilgrimages, exposing them to disease. It wasn't neglected, just bad advice. Better practices slowly emerged in later centuries. But medieval baby care was often a matter of tragic trial and error. Medieval hygiene myths. Despite stereotypes, Early medieval Europeans cared about cleanliness. Bathhouses were common in cities like Paris and London. Monks followed strict hygiene rules, and the wealthy used perfumed soaps. Even peasants used simple soaps made from ash and fat. The shift came after the Black Death in the 1300s. Fear of disease made people believe bathing opened the body to illness. Bathhouses closed, and dry cleaning, wiping with scented cloths, and changing undergarments became the norm. Clean linen became a status symbol. Hair care also declined. People stopped washing and used wigs or hats to cover greasy hair. Ironically, it was the Renaissance and early modern Europeans who had abandoned bathing who labeled the Middle Ages dirty. In truth, many medieval towns had clean water access, drainage systems, and regulated soap making. The real decline in hygiene happened later, driven more by fear than ignorance.